Well, it can be argued that these consequences are so severe that we, of course, would not permit this to happen, and that great safeguards are taken to prevent accidental nuclear war, inadvertent nuclear war. But I think we only have to go back 2 years to two spectacular technological catastrophes of the two superpowers to see how bankrupt this argument is. I'm talking about Challenger and Chernobyl. Here we have high technologies in which enormous amounts of national prestige have been invested by the United States and the Soviet Union, and which nevertheless spectacularly fail. There are many ironies here, one of which is a year before Chernobyl, an interview with the Soviet deputy minister of heavy industry or something was published in the Soviet English language magazine Soviet Life, in which this guy, by bad luck, picked on Chernobyl as an example of the safety of Soviet fission reactors, and estimated, she said had been carefully done, that the average time to catastrophic failure for the Chernobyl nuclear plant would be 100,000 years. That's how long you'd have to wait before there was a serious accident at Chernobyl. And he was pointing to this as an example of the safety of Soviet nuclear power facilities. 1 year later, kaboom. And likewise for the Challenger space shuttle disaster, in which 7 astronauts lost their lives. Both NASA and contractor spokespersons had said less than a year before the Challenger disaster that the average time to spectacular failure would be 10,000 years. Now, these aren't just any old technologies. These are technologies which are important for the public images of the United States and the Soviet Union, where there isn't anything like the secrecy involved that there is in the nuclear arms race. And therefore, the opportunity for vigorous criticism is much larger than in a compartmentalized, secret environment such as involves nuclear weapons. For these and similar reasons, the claim that, yes, we have an extremely dangerous technology, but don't worry, we have absolutely impassable safeguards, should be greeted with some significant skepticism, in my view. And then beyond that, there is the evident fact, evident in the century of Hitler and Stalin, that madmen can achieve the highest offices in modern industrial nations. And in fact, I think it is apparent, even from recent history of many nations, that the psychological screening for highest officials is not what it might be. And therefore, it must be only a matter of time. It's very clear, for example, that in 1944 and 45, if Hitler had nuclear weapons and the Allies had nuclear weapons, and it was guaranteed to Hitler that if Hitler used nuclear weapons, that Germany would be destroyed, that nevertheless Hitler would have used nuclear weapons. In fact, Hitler was as angry at the German people for not doing some superhuman effort to deflect the Allied invasion as he was at the Allies. He wanted the German people to be punished. And that kind of psychology in a national leader with nuclear weapons is something, I believe, to be worried about. So, the nuclear arms race is something supremely foolish that we have done, always for patriotic reasons, always thinking the short term and ignoring the long term. It is a kind of machine that goes by itself. Each side's escalation prompts the other side to escalate, and is capable, certainly, of obliterating the United States and the Soviet Union, and Western Europe, Eastern Europe, China, Japan, Canada, That's, of course, not the whole planet, but for those of us who live in those countries, and even for a few others, that would be a significant loss. Nuclear war would very likely destroy the global civilization, and conceivably, although this is much less certain, could end the few million-year-old experiment, human experiment on the planet Earth. Stakes are never higher. Here is an example of a technology that endangers everybody on the planet. And yes, there are some stirrings. We will, if all goes well, next month have a 3% reduction in those 60,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. It's at least a step in the right direction. But at the same time, the United States and the Soviet Union will be building more nuclear weapons than those taken away in the INF Treaty. Both nations build something like 2 or 3 net new nuclear weapons every day. And this is going to take some doing to undo the nuclear arms race. In my view, what is needed is to bring it down at least to a kind of minimum deterrence in which each side retains an invulnerable capability to annihilate the other, but not enough to destroy the global civilization. That seems to me minimal prudence. I think there's a significant chance, I don't know what it is, it's certainly not as high as 50%, of doing that, but it's certainly not going to be easy. Now I want to say something about cost of the nuclear arms race, and indeed of armaments in general. The world spends every year $1 trillion on armaments. The United States and the Soviet Union vie with each other for the privilege of selling the most arms to other, usually developing nations. And this money, I think an extraterrestrial observer might believe, is not being used in the most efficient way for human betterment. We could ask another question. How much money has the United States spent on the Cold War since 1945? Now, I'm not for a moment arguing that there aren't real reasons to have a significant and prudent national defense, but I think a case can be made that you could do that with significantly less money than has actually been spent. How much money has been spent? By the time the Reagan administration leaves office in January 1989, conceivably earlier, the total amount in 1987 dollars that will have been spent on the Cold War is $10 trillion by the United States. What could you buy for $10 trillion? The answer is you could buy everything. Everything in the United States except the land you could purchase for $10 trillion. Highways, skyscrapers, ships, boats, airplanes, cars, schoolrooms, baby diapers, everything. So it seems to me that does raise the question of, has this been the most effective use of our money? And likewise, has it been the most effective use of the comparable Soviet expenditures? In addition to the question of the amount of money spent on this, there's the question of the deflection of scientific and engineering talent away from the civilian economy. More than half the scientists and technologists on the planet today are employed by the various military establishments. What would happen if a significant fraction of them were pried loose to develop other kinds of technology that might be a little more beneficial? As Lester mentioned, the United States has gone within the last few years from being the largest creditor to the largest debtor nation on the planet. The national debt is not only larger than that of any previous administration, it is larger than the sum of all previous administrations back to George Washington. Since 1980, the annual increase in the budget deficit is almost exactly the annual increase in military expenditures. I am very far from understanding anything about economics, but it occurs to me that these two facts may be connected. I also wonder if the boom in the German and Japanese economies might have something to do with the fact that their military budgets as a fraction of the gross national product have been extremely low because of the United States supplying a significant amount of their defense and concerned by other nations that Japanese and German rearmament in the light of World War II may be undesirable. There is a sense in which, and this may be too strong, I'll say it anyway, in which the United States is showing signs of being a kind of developing nation. It is 17th in the world in infant mortality. A quarter of the population is functionally illiterate. High school students all over the United States cannot locate the United States on an unmarked world map, have no idea where their own country is. I saw one excursion of this sort where a student asked to identify where the Soviet Union was, pointed to Nicaragua. This may be a consequence of the success of the president's propaganda, but it is geographically incompetent. Patent applications are steeply down. There are evident homeless people in every major city. 20 million people in the United States are hungry every day. That is, skip one or more meal because they can't afford it. There are half as many graduate degrees in science and technology every year in the United States than in Japan, which has half the American population. Public transportation and urban infrastructure in general are a disgrace by, say, European standards. There are lax environmental standards. In some respects, the United States is one of the most backward nations on the planet in dealing with its technological waste. And the kind of decisions which are in effect made are that we need the jobs so desperately that we will sacrifice the health of some of the citizens. The United States is 14th in the world in percent of the population with safe water. Now, all of these things are connected with money. You could solve these problems in the United States if there were more money available to do it. Why is that money not available? It seems to me it is very clear that one of the chief reasons it's not available, both in the direct sense and in the indirect sense of what those scientists and technologists could do if they weren't working for the military, is the military budget. And any attempt to emerge from the global economic crisis, which Lester has outlined, seems to me, and I claim no significant expertise here, to have to deal with the question of the massive military budgets of the United States and the Soviet Union, and indeed in the developing world as well. This has clearly been recognized by Mr. Gorbachev, who makes it clear that one of the reasons he's interested in both nuclear and conventional arms reduction treaties is to free up some of the military sector of the Soviet economy for civilian uses. And to do that, there are changes needed in the openness in the society and the freedoms which are given to citizens. Very hard to do significant pioneering science and technology in a society in which you are not permitted to make public criticism. Criticism is the lifeblood of the scientific method. And so from economic necessity, freedom is, at least to a limited extent, is driven. And precisely the same thing is true in China, and the statement has been explicitly made by Deng Xiaoping. I guess what I'm saying is the definition of national security involves more than how many weapons you have. In fact, in terms of nuclear weapons, there is certainly a point in which the more nuclear weapons you have, the less safe you are, as I was trying to argue before. There's a kind of counterintuitive aspect of modern technology in the military and in the civilian spheres. And there is a necessity after 1945 of what Einstein called a new way of thinking, which is very slowly permeating into the minds of leaders. On the question of the definition of national defense, I'd like to read to you a one-sentence quote from Dwight Eisenhower. "The problem in defense spending is to figure how far you should go without destroying from within what you are trying to defend from without." And any definition of national security, it seems to me, has to involve the well-being of the citizens, economic well-being, a positive sense of the future based not on pap, but on real expectations, education, especially in science and technology. The scientific illiteracy of Americans in general is scandalous. Every day there are significant decisions made in Washington involving science and technology, which have very long outreach into the future. And 435 members of Congress, there are perhaps two who, in any sense, have a scientific or technological background. The Office of the President's Science Advisor has been downgraded. In recent years, the President's Scientific Advisory Committee was canceled in the Nixon administration because it gave advice that was politically undesired. The laws of physics did not correspond adequately enough to the ideological wishes of the leadership. And no subsequent president has thought it advisable to resuscitate the President's Science Advisory Committee. For a nation which is in many significant respects dependent upon science and technology, to arrange things that nobody knows anything about science and technology is clearly suicide. And some of the problems that I've been mentioning before are connected to this. How is it we didn't foresee the consequences of many of these technologies? It's because there's a very small science and technology base in the United States. There's a small science and technology base in the Soviet Union as well, but they are doing a lot more in scientific and technological education than we are. How much science and technology do you see, for example, in the mass media? Every newspaper in America has a daily astrology column. How many have even a weekly science column? Why is this? How much science do you see on television? When somebody wins the Nobel Prize, do you ever get a coherent explanation of what he won it for? What was this discovery that was important enough to win a Nobel Prize? Well, the basic sense in television is that the American people are too stupid to understand, and that it takes concentration, and therefore in the quest for small differential advantage in the competition between the networks, that it will be a means of losing ratings to spend time explaining what science is about. Short-term advantage for the network, long-term disaster for the country. Well, I have just one concluding remark, and that is that I know I've been slightly negative in this presentation. There is not the slightest doubt that science and technology, but in particular the scientific way of thinking, can be used in a very significant way to turn around many of these problems and to work for human betterment. But it requires a break with the idea that everything we've done in the past is okay and any criticism of it is is impermissible. That so many people, for example, of both political parties, and in fact in the United States and the Soviet Union, have invested their entire careers on the advisability of the nuclear arms race, that already means that there is a vast vested interest in turning things around. And this is true in many of the other technological areas that I mentioned. In order to justify a lifetime of somnambulance on the critical issues, people are reluctant to even have those critical issues addressed. So what I think is most urgently needed in all aspects of life, the United States and the Soviet Union and elsewhere, is a comprehensive baloney detection kit in which the average citizen can treat with appropriate skepticism remarks made by high government officials and those justifying the continuance of the way we've always done things, whatever those things are. I think widespread critical thinking is an essential precondition for the higher standards of leadership that we desperately need, and for the higher standards of education and awareness of the problems we face, which I think is required of every citizen.